Hello students, Mr. Yen here. Today we're talking about Chapter 12, Lesson 2. It's called Conflicts Over Land. Now, I love America. You can probably tell. I also love American history. Teaching it is a pleasure and I enjoy making these lessons for you. Loving one's country, like loving a person, means accepting the good with the bad. Now, our nation's history is full of proud moments, but there are also some things that you have to look back at and say, America, that was a jerk move. You got to take the good with the bad, though, and learn the bad so that you don't do it again. Today we talk about some things, specifically uh, involving Native Americans, that highlight some of our not-so-great moments. So, as Americans moved west, there were still a great number of Indian tribes in the east. They were mainly in the south, tribes like the Seminole and the Cherokee. There were 5 tribes that had basically formed up into farming villages like every other American. These were called the 5 civilized tribes. Americans recognized the success of these tribes in their adoption of the American way of life, but they still did not really respect them. In fact, they wanted their land. Many folks wanted the government to relocate the natives further west. When elected, Andrew Jackson supported the idea of moving all the natives into the Great Plains, a place believed to be a wasteland no American would ever want to live. It was believed that this relocation would end all Indian conflicts once and for all. Now, in 1830, President Jackson pushed a law through Congress called the Indian Removal Act. This allowed the USA to pay Indians to move west. In 1834, Congress set up a huge Indian reserve in what would become mostly Oklahoma. Most natives felt forced to comply and moved west, but not the Cherokee. The Cherokee ended up taking the state of Georgia to the Supreme Court. John Marshall, who's still the Chief Justice, actually sided with the Cherokee, citing previous treaties made with the natives. However, Andrew Jackson simply ignored the court. The court had no power to enforce this ruling. That was Jackson's job as president, and he wasn't going to enforce it. He wanted those natives to move. Now, there would be more problems for the Cherokee. In 1835, the federal government got a small group of Cherokee to sign a treaty giving up all Cherokee claims by 1838. The problem was this group only represented about 500 of the 17,000 Cherokee. Jackson used this trickery to get the treaty officially approved by the Senate in 1836 by only one vote. Many recognized the questionable terms of the treaty. Regardless, it passed, and when the deadline was reached in 1838, Jackson's successor, President Martin Van Buren, enforced the treaty by sending federal troops to force the Cherokees west. Some 15,000 Cherokee were rounded up. Many were not ready for the journey, and illness spread throughout these camps that were set up. There was not enough food, and conditions were harsh. It was winter. By the time the forced relocation was over, a quarter of the Cherokee population had died. They call it the Trail of Tears. Resistance and removal. Only one group of natives were successful in resisting removal. That was the Seminole of Florida. In 1835, a group of soldiers went down to Florida to remove the Seminole. They were attacked instead and almost killed down to pretty much down to the last man. Only a few survived. The leader of these Seminole was a man named Osceola. There he is right there. He's got a statue. Now, between 1835 and 1842, about 3,000 Seminoles and Black Seminoles fought roughly 30,000 U.S. troops. The Black Seminoles were escaped slaves that basically lived among the Seminole or set up their own community and lived in peace with the Seminole. They would basically not go back to a life of slavery, so they were in it to win it too. This war cost many lives of both the U.S. and the Seminole and the Black Seminoles, and the U.S. ended up spending millions of dollars on this war. By 1842, most of the Seminole had been forced to relocate into Indian territory, but war broke out again in 1855, with a few remaining Seminole left in Florida. The last of the Seminole hid in the Everglades, where their descendants still live today. Now, the 5 civilized tribes were relocated in what's Mississippi and placed on lands already claimed by other tribes. To avoid any problems involving turf wars between the civilized tribes and these tribes whose land they basically gave to the civilized tribes, the U.S. Army built forts in the area to keep the peace. The Choctaw tribe had their own police force called the Light Horsemen. There's really cool write-ups on the Light Horsemen. They were basically like the Indian police, manned by Indians. The civilized tribes rebuilt their farms, schools, and homes. They wrote constitutions and laws. All was not well, though. Problems associated with their forced removal would continue to arise. Now, that's it for our lesson for today. You go on the next page, you have a basic quiz. 5 questions, 10 points. 2 attempts necessary, or if necessary. That's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. There's all kinds of supplemental material on this. If there's anything you'd like to know more about, I linked in the Light Horsemen. It's just pretty cool. But there's a lot more information out there on the 5 civilized tribes as well as the Trail of Tears. Alright, that's it for today. Have a good one.